There are 3 habits that you need to adopt if you want to supercharge your PhD, and they might not be what you're expecting them to be. I'm Dr. Elizabeth Yardley, and in the 20 years that I've been supporting PhD students, my best and most successful students are the ones who've adopted these habits and stuck to them. So let's take a look. Firstly, regularly revisiting your literature review. I still see people making this classic mistake with literature reviews, and that is leaving it months and months or even years and years since they last looked at their literature review. They'll do some work on it, maybe a massive, big, intensive chunk of work on it, and then they'll just leave it for ages. And the longer you leave it since the last time you looked at your literature review, the more work you're going to have to do on it. Invariably, the literature review that you drafted months or more than a year ago is going to need to change, because things might have shifted since you last looked at it. Because as you go through the process of your PhD, things that you thought were really important at the beginning might not be so important as you get a bit further into it, and you're going to come across new things and new perspectives and new theories that you're going to need to integrate. So you need to make sure that your literature review that you have in draft format that is accompanying you throughout your PhD journey reflects the research that you're actually doing. The only way that you're going to do this, and the only way you're going to save yourself loads of time at the end, is by regularly revisiting it. You don't need to be spending days and days and days on it or interrupting your flow, but you do need to be dipping back into it regularly. I would say once every 2 to 3 weeks, set aside a couple of hours and just sit down and have a scan through it. You need to be super strategic when you do sit down to do this and ensure that you don't go and disappear down a literature review rabbit hole. So I've got these 3 questions that you can ask yourself every time you sit down to check in with your literature review. So feel free to take a screenshot. Write these questions down and copy them into a recurring calendar appointment for yourself. And once you've done a few of these sessions and you've gotten used to revisiting your literature review, this is going to help you feel much more in control of it and your PhD in general. And it's going to avoid any nasty little shocks at the end when you go back and you look at that literature review that you wrote 18 months ago and realise that it doesn't have an awful lot to do with the research that you ended up carrying out. Habit number 2 is all about writing regularly. Academic writing is something that a lot of PhD students struggle with. Actually, most PhD students struggle with this at some point. So if this is you, you're not alone. And the reasons for it vary. I mean, you might have a massive case of imposter syndrome and feel that you just can't write in the same way that people in your field write or the way that your supervisors write. You might feel like you're not smart enough, you're not intellectual enough, you don't know enough big, fancy, elaborate words. You might get terrible writer's block every time you sit down to write something. Whatever the reason, the only way that you're going to get past this stuff is regularly showing up to write. The only way you're going to get better and more confident at writing is by actually doing it. And this doesn't even have to be writing on your actual thesis. It might be writing a blog about your research, or a Facebook or a LinkedIn post, or writing something for your university website. In fact, writing for these other things can actually be quite good practice for writing for your thesis because they're smaller pieces of work. They're not such a big deal and the stakes don't feel quite so high. So practice, practice, practice on this stuff. You need a regular writing slot in your diary, and this should be at least once a week. That might be a Friday morning, a Wednesday afternoon. Find whatever time works for you. Start off with just 1 hour. Decide what you want to write and just go. It doesn't matter if it's nonsense when you begin writing, if you churn out a load of drivel. You will get better at it if you are consistent. And believe me, we all start off writing drivel. If you were to see the first draft of that article that your supervisor has just published in a world-leading journal, you would see that that first draft was an absolute mess. It was full of nonsense and rubbish and fluff and filler. Writing is a process and there's mechanical stuff that needs to happen. What you begin with is not a reflection of your intelligence or your worth as a scholar. It's just a first draft. It's worth trotting out this very well used quote here, so take a screenshot of it and save it on your phone. Habit number 3, connection. A PhD can be quite a lonely and an isolating experience. The reason that many PhD students get overwhelmed and worked up and feel like massive imposters is because they spend way too much time in their own heads. This can be something that really holds you back because you start believing this internal chatter and this misery narrative. It can lead to overwhelm, burnout, despair, all of the stuff that you really don't need when you are producing research that is literally going to change the world. The best way to tackle these things is through connection. That connection might take several different forms. So, for example, following some of the PhD student accounts on social media or joining a Facebook group for doctoral candidates. But by far the best way that's worked most effectively for the students I've supported is to have regular check-ins with other PhD students. So meet up with other PhD students on at least a monthly basis, just to have a catch-up and a chat and a bit of a rant. And these catch-ups do need a bit of structure, an agenda of sorts. You might want to agree on a series of topics or questions that you're going to work through within the catch-up. So, for example, reflecting on how the last month has gone, making some plans for the next month, outlining things that are working for you, things that are not working for you. This kind of thing can be really good because it enables you to check whether you are veering off course or whether you're staying on course, and it makes you feel a lot better about your own experience and making some plans going forward. It can be so helpful to hear what other people are struggling with, what kinds of things they're doing to overcome those struggles. And you will find that a lot of the things that they share with you is very familiar. It's not just you who's feeling the way you are about a particular chapter. It's not just you who feels like a massive imposter. And you get a lot of comfort from this, but what you also get is some ideas and some strategies about things that you can do to move beyond them. So check whether your university actually runs a regular session like this, and if they don't, maybe think about setting one up. Talk to people about it, your supervisors, your administrators, your student rep. These kind of things can be so valuable because the internal chatter, the misery narrative, can be quite a significant force that is holding you back. And the more that you can confront that, the more that you can talk about it and rant about it and realise that it's not just you, the less it's going to hold you back. So there you have it, 3 habits that are going to supercharge your doctoral studies. Revisiting your literature review, writing regularly, and connecting with other PhD students. I hope you found that helpful. Be sure to come back for my next video in which I'll be sharing more tips and advice on navigating the messy and the magical of the PhD journey. I'll see you then.